Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson, and I'm really happy to bring you back to our Civil Human Bible study today. I'm a civil human minister, so what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. And so it's in that effort that I'm going through my own spiritual tradition and the teachings of Jesus to try to find those teachings that I feel are applicable to all humans across the board, regardless of our different faiths, our different politics, and our different lifestyles. I believe that there are some important and beautiful truths that can be brought to every human across the board in much of our ancestral teaching. And that's why I'm bringing my own background and my own spiritual heritage. So let's go ahead and jump into the passage. It's Matthew chapter 26, 1 through 13. And we will start in verse 1. Now it came to pass, when Jesus had finished all these sayings, that he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." Then the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. But they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people." And when Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him having an alabaster flask of very costly fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head, and he sat at the table. But when his disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "To what purpose is this waste? For this fragrant oil might have been sold for much more and given to the poor." But when Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not always have. For in pouring the fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her." So many of you know that this Bible is one that was given to me by my father when I graduated high school. He spent, of course, a great deal of time going through the whole thing and writing notes in the sides and the columns. And he, of course, gave me the opportunity, which I'm grateful, to go ahead and share those with you, some of the notes that he wrote. So there is one scribbled in here, which I haven't read yet. So it'll be interesting for both of us to read. So let's go ahead and I'm going to read that little inscription from my dad for you. He's got a doctor's handwriting, so forgive me if it takes a little while. The principle of waste is the principle of usefulness. God is looking for you to, quote, waste yourself, your most costly gift, on him. Thanks, Dad. I'd like to share a bit about this story. It is placed in a very strange place in the account of Jesus, and there's a reason for it, and a principle behind it that I think will become more apparent as we walk through the passage, and is really pretty timely for us, especially given everything. For those of us living in the United States, it's election week. So there's a lot of commotion and a lot of stress and a lot of unknowns and variables. And this passage actually, I think, is really a great little conversation and sort of side oasis for us to consider in all of this stressful time. So I'd like to walk through the passage a little bit with you to talk about some of what the culture would have understood and what these words meant to the people back then. Look at the Greek and to see what it can tell us about the language and what was being said, so that way we can walk away. And in the end of this little study, I want to provide some reflections on what I feel are the takeaways for those of us who are human beings, just human beings, regardless of our faith or politics or lifestyle. Let's start with the very beginning of this passage. This is basically a setup to a larger conversation. So we're at the tail end of Jesus's time on earth here, his time of ministry. He's about 30 years of age at this point, give or take. And at this point, he's sat down with his disciples and he tells them, I'm going to be crucified in 2 days after the Passover happens. And we've talked a little bit about what the Passover is. It's this big holiday for the Jewish people that they celebrate every year. And hundreds of thousands of pilgrims have come to Jerusalem to celebrate this, which is their capital city. And it's a celebration of when God delivered the Jewish people out of the slavery from under the pharaohs in Egypt. Some of you may know the story about Moses, who there was an animated movie, Prince of Egypt, was created about it. The Ten Commandments was an epic show with Charlton Heston, I think. And anyway, it's the story of Moses and basically God saving Israel from being slaves in a foreign country. And now, this is the context in which they're set in. It's going to be a very beautiful passage even tomorrow and the next day, because we're going to talk about Passover, and many of you have heard about communion and the bread and the wine. We're going to talk about what that actually means and why they did that, what the importance was, and how that ties to Passover. Right now, though, what I want to point out is that Jesus is setting up his disciples, and Matthew, who's writing this, is setting us up as readers to understand that this is the beginning of the end. It is a tumultuous time. It's a time of great stress, not only for Jesus, but also for his disciples. It's a time when things are going to start happening that have huge consequences, massive consequences for everybody involved in the story. Jesus is pointing out to them, I'm about to be put to death. And then in the next verse, the next section of this story, we actually have a look into the religious leaders of the day. Right? These are the people who are supposed to be helping the people who are helping others, right? But unfortunately in Jesus' day, and unfortunately a lot like many of our religious leaders today, have lost focus on helping those who are suffering, but instead have focused on helping themselves. And that's the context that Jesus is in. And now they don't like Jesus because he is only helping and lifting up those who are suffering, and it's making them look bad. And so now they are plotting to kill Jesus. They're talking about how and when to do it. That's pretty devious, to talk about how to kill somebody. We're not just talking about how to ruin somebody or to provide some scandal. We're talking about how to kill somebody. That's something I want to bring up at the very end here. So anyway, they've provided this thought. We don't want to do it during the festival, which is this Passover time, because we don't want there to be a riot, because there's hundreds of thousands of people in Jerusalem. And then we get the beginning of this really, I think, beautiful story. Jesus is in Bethany, which is just south of Jerusalem a little bit. And he's at this house of, they say, Simon the leper, which was kind of a weird nickname to have. We can assume by the passage and by some other conversations in the other accounts that Simon was previously a leper who has been healed. And I just thought it was interesting that they actually titled him that. But anyway, they're at his house and they're gathered together. They're leaning at the table, which in this time in ancient Israel, a lot of us sit around a table in chairs like I'm doing right now. In that time, they really leaned against the table, and they'd lean up against some cushions, so they were more of a lying prostrate and up against the table. And as they're doing that, this woman comes breaking in, and she brings a vial of, they say, this alabaster jar of something that is perfume-esque, is a fragrance that it's very expensive, and she pours it over Jesus's head. And then we have the disciples freaking out about it because she's wasted this vial of perfume, which is expensive perfume, she's wasted it without giving it to them to sell and to give to the poor, is what they're saying. And then Jesus comes to them and says, "Why are you bothering this woman? She came here and did basically a good thing." And Jesus says she actually has anointed him for burial. And one of the things that they used to do when somebody was being buried, is that they would pour perfume over the wrappings of the body, obviously because they didn't have any way to keep the body from beginning to smell. So that was one way for them to cover odor while individuals would come and pay their respects at the time. So basically, Jesus is sort of foretelling what's going to be happening. There's a couple of things I want to point out in this particular part of the passage. One, we have this person, Judas, and we're going to talk about him in a little bit, but in another study coming up, we're going to talk a lot about him. He's this guy, we have the saying, don't be a Judas. He's this guy who is the one who betrays Jesus to hand him over to the religious leaders. And we're going to see that coming up here. In other accounts, there are other accounts in this Bible about Jesus, and they tell the story, and they have Judas being this person who is actually upset. Remember, it said the disciples were upset that this woman broke this vial and poured the perfume over Jesus. It was, in other accounts, we're told as Judas, who is the one who holds the money and is the basically treasurer accountant. And the implication is that that Judas is stealing basically from that. And that's really why he was upset. Not because he wanted to help the poor, but because it was money that he could have siphoned off for himself. Either way, we get this very beautiful ending. And it's Jesus saying, stop bothering this woman. She has done something amazing and prepared me for burial. She's aware of what's going to be happening. She's participating in him. And more than that, he goes on to say that her story is going to be told throughout the whole world. Wherever the story of Jesus goes, it's going to go with her. And Matthew has, of course, written that into the account to make sure that is the case, to sort of fulfill those words of Jesus. I want to talk about why it was important, or what was so shocking about this experience, and why Matthew put this in here in the first place. It is unusual for a person to, of course, barge into a dinner and to just start pouring perfume over somebody, right? I mean, it would be unusual for us today. More than that, because she was a woman, in this ancient culture, it would be considered inappropriate for her to have barged in on the men and to interrupted their conversation, and more than that, to pour perfume on him and to anoint him. Now, why is she doing this? Why? It kind of seems like a random thing, right? To pour perfume on somebody. In this ancient time, the way that they showed appreciation, the way that they showed their love and their excitement for a guest to be in their house, is they would pour fragrant oil, or oil that had been infused with a very fragrant flower, and they would pour it on their head, and that was a way of saying, we love you because we're spending something, that's expensive on you. And that's the message here. That this lady, who in other parts of this account is talked about as being possibly a prostitute, but is definitely described as being a woman who has lived a life of sin. So we've kind of inferred that that's prostitution. But regardless, here's a person who recognizes the great work that Jesus is doing, who recognizes how important he is and how important his message is, because she came from those who are suffering. She understands that she has not ever been helped or aided by any of the religious leaders of Jesus' days. The only people who would come to touch her, to come to speak and minister to her, to serve her, and to help her and to heal her, was Jesus and his sort of group, his posse. They were the only people who were willing to do that. And for her, she recognized how incredible this was and how different it was, in so much as she embarrasses herself by coming in and putting perfume on somebody. It is a beautiful example of what happens when we help those who are truly suffering. When we step into people's lives who are truly hurting, when we step in to help them in whatever way it is, whether it's a kind word, whether it's paying a bill for them, whether that's cooking a dinner for them, whether it's taking them to coffee, whatever it is, appreciation is huge. It makes them feel wonderful, and they will in turn appreciate you. In these times, and this is where I want to close and bring it back to our conversation about being humans. In these times right now, when we are facing division, when we're facing leadership who seems to be only seeking to divide, to malign individuals, and I'm speaking of a number of leaders here, it is so important right now to pay attention to those people who are doing good work. The people who are caring for the poor, who are caring for the suffering and the sick, and those who are ill and mentally have challenges that they face, or whatever their suffering is, those individuals are so important to our society, and appreciating them is vital. It is important because right now, the people who are standing up to help those who are suffering, they themselves are suffering greatly. Because in our society right now, those people are not being appreciated. Those people are fighting against what seems to be an unceasing wave, tsunami of negativity and anger and selfishness. I might encourage you today as we close to maybe think about somebody in your life who either they've helped you or you know that they spend a great deal of time helping other people. I might encourage you to do something for them. Buy them a gift, buy them coffee, take them to dinner, or send them a dinner. Send them a Grubhub dinner. Pay a bill for them, talk to them, whatever it is, they will appreciate it. And appreciation is one of those things that creates a huge force of strength and rebirth for people. I want to thank you for joining me today in this study. I've really enjoyed this process. I've enjoyed going through my own spiritual heritage and just looking at it from a human perspective, and looking at it from sort of a fresh way to take it, and seeing that there are some things that from my own heritage are beautiful and usable right here, right now, regardless of all of the differences that we seem to think are so important right now. We do have these commonalities. I want to encourage you, if you have thoughts or reflections, to put those in the comments below the video. I do really appreciate those. It helps for me to learn, and it helps for other people to learn and grow as well. So thank you for doing that. I would love it if you would like my Facebook page. And if you're on YouTube, there's a button right down there that you can click on to subscribe. That way we can stay in contact with one another, because there's some fun programs coming up that I'm really excited to tell you about. So until tomorrow, when we see each other again live at noon, I want you to know that I love you. And I hope you choose to love yourself. It's the only love in this world that we have any control over. And now I would invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving those around us the same way. Thank you.